This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Every so often, a movie comes along which makes such a huge pop cultural impact that the face of the entire entertainment landscape is changed forever. In 1968, there was 2001: A Space Odyssey. In 1977, there was Star Wars. And in 1999, there was The Matrix. From an early age, Lily and Lana Wachowski were unabashed nerds, devouring comic books and enjoying regular games of Dungeons & Dragons. While at university, this love of geeky media paid off when they landed their first writing gigs at Marvel Comics, working on an adaptation of Clive Barker's Hellraiser among other things. Their passion for writing soon took them to Hollywood, where they successfully sold 3 projects to Warner Brothers. The first of these was an action thriller titled Assassins. However, much of their script was completely rewritten. The finished script was so different to their original work, they even attempted to have their names taken off the film, but were unsuccessful. Rather than becoming disillusioned, the siblings decided to get into directing as well as writing, to retain creative control of their future projects. Their ambitions certainly paid off in their directorial debut, Bound. Though not a box office success, the film received extremely positive critical reviews and developed a strong cult following. A same-sex relationship being the central focus of the plot was quite controversial in the mid-90s, but the Wachowskis received praise for their deft and progressive handling of the subject matter, as well as their stylish and skillful direction. The Wachowskis accrued enough goodwill at Warner Brothers with Bound that they were also able to lobby to direct the third film the studio had bought, a cyberpunk action extravaganza called The Matrix. In many ways, The Matrix was the culmination of an underground pop culture movement, which was yet to cross over into the mainstream. Japanese anime and Hong Kong action movies had found a market in Europe and North America, but only in video rental stores and early internet forums. Simultaneously, the well-established genre of cyberpunk had found its greatest success in the 80s with works like Blade Runner and RoboCop. While its tropes dominated video games and literature, in terms of pure sales figures and pop culture awareness, the works of the cyberpunk genre paled in comparison to more mainstream sci-fi hits like Star Wars and Star Trek. The Wachowskis, however, were among the early enthusiasts of these cult fanbases, citing anime works like Ghost in the Shell and Ninja Scroll, Hong Kong action movies like Hard Boiled and Legend of the Fist, and literature from authors like William Gibson and Philip K. Dick as major influences. Their vision for The Matrix captivated producer Joel Silver when the Wachowskis showed him the films Akira and Ghost in the Shell and said, "We want to do this, but for real." As part of the trio's presentation to Warner Brothers, they hired comic book artists Jeff Darrow and Steve Skroce to create a 600-page storyboard of the entire movie. While Warner Brothers was still unsure of financing the proposed $60 million budget, thanks to the Wachowskis and Silver's passion for the project, the studio eventually gave the film the green light. When it came to casting the film, the Wachowskis initially approached Will Smith to play the lead character Neo. Smith was a huge movie star at the time, and he was actually approached before the green light was given, as his involvement would have made the project seem much more bankable. Smith, however, later admitted he didn't fully understand the concept behind the movie, and reflected that he wasn't ready to take on a role like Neo. Nicolas Cage and Brad Pitt were also offered the part, but both turned it down, as did Val Kilmer. The Wachowskis' first choice for the role was Johnny Depp, who came close to actually landing the part. However, Warner Brothers championed Keanu Reeves. Reeves was fresh off the success of Speed and The Devil's Advocate, and was considered a much bigger star than Depp at the time. While the Wachowskis were initially reluctant, Reeves totally understood the concept right from the get-go, proving to be just as big a fan of Asian action movies and Japanese anime as the Wachowskis themselves. And so when offered the part, Reeves was cast as Neo. To play Morpheus, Russell Crowe was offered the role but turned it down due to scheduling conflicts. Lawrence Fishburne, like Keanu Reeves, immediately got the script, not understanding why other actors found it so confusing. Fishburne by that point was a veteran stage and screen actor. His breakout feature role came in the drama Boys in the Hood, and he earned an Oscar nomination for his work in What's Love Got to Do with It. He landed a wide range of roles in the late 90s in such films as Higher Learning, Othello, and Event Horizon before landing The Matrix. The Wachowskis' first choice for the role of Trinity was pop star Janet Jackson, but she was too busy on tour to accept the part. The second choice for the role was Sandra Bullock, who was also considered for Neo when the Wachowskis suggested making the character female. In the end, the part went to Canadian actress Carrie-Anne Moss. Before The Matrix, Moss was a relatively unknown television actress, having actually starred in a short-lived fantasy adventure series titled Matrix. She also appeared in Baywatch and FX the series, as well as movies like The Secret Life of Algernon. To play Agent Smith, the Wachowskis' first choice was French actor Jean Reno. However, he was unwilling to move to Australia for the shoot and be away from his family. Hugo Weaving, on the other hand, was already residing in Australia, his English family having moved there when he was 16. While Weaving had mostly spent his career in Australian television and film, he earned international acclaim for his lead roles in Priscilla Queen of the Desert and The Interview. Rounding out the cast was acclaimed actress Gloria Foster as the Oracle, John Pantoliano as Cypher, Matt Doran as Mouse, Marcus Chong as Tank, Anthony Ray Parker as Dozer, Julian Arahanga as Apoc, and Belinda McClory as Switch. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the ultimate tool for creating your own beautiful website. I recently redesigned my website galaxyclasspictures.com using Squarespace's cutting-edge design tools like Blueprint AI, which helped me generate a brand new personalized template, which I then customized using Squarespace's easy-to-use Fluid engine. Squarespace also helps with your site's discoverability with their built-in SEO and domain name features. You can optimize your website so it shows up more often in searches and secure your ideal domain name. No extra fees and no add-ons required. Jump over to Squarespace using the link below to start building your website and use the coupon code Rowan J. Coleman to get 10% off your first purchase. Because so many of the considered cast members had difficulty understanding the script for The Matrix, the Wachowskis required all those who were cast to be able to explain the film on both a literal and thematic level. To this end, the Wachowskis made Simulacra and Simulation by philosopher Jean Baudrillard required reading. For the martial arts action of the film, the Wachowskis approached Hong Kong stunt coordinator and director Yuen Wo-ping to arrange the stunts, fight choreography, as well as train the cast. Wo-ping was initially reluctant to lend his skills to an American production. Therefore, he responded with what he thought was an unreasonable demand the producers would never accommodate. He demanded all major cast members spend 8 months training so they could do as much of the fighting as possible themselves. To Wo-ping's surprise, the Wachowskis agreed to this demand, and so he and his stunt team joined the production.
And they said, there'll be lots of training, kung fu training, and are you okay with that? And I said, yeah, sure, that's no problem at all. And I guess I didn't really think about it enough.
I totally knew, because I screen tested for 3 hours doing this stuff. This was part of my screen test, was 3 hours of what we do, straight, without like other actors to have time so that I can have a breather.
I'll tell you one thing, those first 2 days kicked my ass.
After the first day, I was so shattered and so shocked, and I realized I was so unfit, and we had so much to do. And I was working with these incredibly skilled Hong Kong performers who were looking at me like, he'll never get there.
Wo-ping's team began with general training for the entire cast before splitting the team up for the individual training of each actor. This training was complicated by several injuries, such as Hugo Weaving fracturing his hip, Carrie-Anne Moss breaking her ankle, and Keanu Reeves recovering from spinal surgery.
Yeah, coming into the training for the first one, I'd had a 2-level fusion in my cervical spine. I was getting paralyzed. So I had the surgery done, and then it was just a waiting game just to see if it would fuse. But it really hindered me a lot in training because I couldn't train kick for like two of the 4 months.
It was devastating to like watch, because I was always like, like it hurt me to watch.
To accommodate both Reeves and Weaving's injuries, the shooting schedule was adjusted so their fight scenes were filmed near the end of production. Moss's injury occurred towards the end of training and close to the start of filming.
And then I hurt myself. I hurt my ankle. Oh no! I remember thinking in the moment that I hurt my ankle that, oh my God, I'm down. But I can't be down. I just was like, okay, no matter what, I'm going to be able to do this. No matter what, I'm going to do this. No matter what, I'm going to do this.
Go. Yeah, right.
Great.
That's good.
Okay.
Filming began in March 1998 at Fox Studios in Sydney. After concluding a few short scenes which required little physical exertion, arranged to help Keanu Reeves' recovery, the opening sequence of Trinity's escape from the police and agents was the first big set piece to be shot. This shoot actually reused several sets originally built for Dark City, which had filmed in the same studio. After filming on the sequence wrapped, the Wachowskis and Joel Silver asked for a rough cut of the scene to be sent to the executives at Warner Brothers, who were still uncertain of the film. After seeing the edited footage, the executives of the studio were completely blown away, and from then on threw their full support behind the project, positioning it as a major summer blockbuster for the following year. In order to further sell the artificial nature of the Matrix, several steps were taken to distinguish it from the real world, most notably in the use of color. Director of photography Bill Pope and production designer Owen Peterson worked together to give the Matrix a predominantly green tint, while the scenes in the real world were made up of blues and greys, and the training simulations in between were given a more yellowish color palette. While this was achieved through the use of filters and lighting, it was also baked into the production design, with many costumes and sets subtly offsetting their usual colors so they leaned more towards each specific color palette. Other tricks were used, such as in one of the training scenes, where the production cast a large number of twins for background extras to give the feeling of a computer program copying and pasting the same character models. While much of filming was complicated by the ambitious visual effects, it was also an extremely demanding production for in-camera effects. For the lobby shootout, many of the setups took over 40 minutes to reset, making any mistakes incredibly costly. For the helicopter shootout, the office was a set built a dozen or so meters off the ground with a cyclorama used for the backdrop of the city. The helicopter itself was a lightweight model maneuvered into position on a large crane with its rotor blades added in post. During the climactic subway station fight, Keanu Reeves' stunt double Chad Stahelski, future director of the John Wick movies, suffered broken ribs, broken knees, and a dislocated shoulder. The final scenes shot were of Neo waking up from the Matrix. For these scenes, Keanu Reeves lost 15 pounds and shaved his entire body so he'd look appropriately emaciated. Filming wrapped after 118 days, several $1 million over budget, and 2 weeks behind the original schedule. For the visual effects of the film, easily the most complex shots were those involving bullet time. At first, Bill Pope attempted to achieve this effect in camera with an extremely high-speed motion-controlled dolly rig. However, after several wrecked cameras and dollies, it was decided bullet time would need to be created in post. It was designer and inventor John Gaeta who devised the best method for the effect, though it was a surprisingly old-school technique. His solution was to place the actors on a green screen surrounded by hundreds of stills cameras arranged in a specific path. Software was then used to trigger each camera in succession, capturing hundreds of single frames in a short amount of time. Further software was written for frame interpolation, the generation of additional frames to be placed between each individual still to create smoother motion. The environments were then recreated in CG using on-location photo scans of each set and location. All elements combined together succeeded in achieving the bullet time effect envisioned by the Wachowskis. To compose the music of the film, the production hired Don Davis. When viewing footage of the movie, Davis noted how heavily the motif of mirrors and reflections was featured, which inspired his approach to the music. He mixed together orchestral, choral, and synthesizer elements in tracks which relied heavily on polytonality. Honestly, if you're into music, I'd highly recommend this video from Inside the Score all about Don Davis' work on The Matrix. It's pretty fascinating stuff and much better articulated by someone who actually knows musical theory and history. After years languishing in the Wachowskis' minds, overcoming its doubters and a demanding production, The Matrix was released on the 31st of March, 1999. It's difficult to know what to say about The Matrix which hasn't already been said. I don't really have any hot takes or anything, instead I'll have to join the choir in naming The Matrix as one of my favourite movies of all time. I first remember seeing The Matrix on a VHS tape someone bought my dad for his birthday, and while the intricacies of the plot and the depths of its themes went completely over 5-year-old Rowan's head, the imagery, atmosphere, and of course the action utterly captivated me. And as I've grown up, rewatching the film more times than I can count, my appreciation for it has only grown with age. The Wachowskis' direction is absolutely sublime. We are blown away by the initial action sequence, which leaves us with nothing but questions. Then much of the first act feels like a horror movie, as what we see, hear, and feel tips us and Thomas Anderson off to the notion that something is wrong with this world. The Matrix is often called a product of the 90s, and these days this is sometimes used as a criticism of the movie. However, I personally feel this actually helps the movie. Viewed through a modern lens, the strangely archaic technology seen in the Matrix itself, chunky PC monitors, all communication going through phone lines, even the internet, actually contributes to the unreal feeling of this world. This is further enhanced by the anonymity of the setting. This could be any generic American city in some vague time period. It succeeds in conveying the idea that the machines constructed the Matrix from bits and pieces of half-destroyed records. But while being inside the Matrix gives us an uncanny feeling, the real world is genuinely horrifying and utterly dystopian. And this is where I think it's appropriate to highlight Keanu Reeves as being such an excellent lead. Once again, detractors of the movie single out Reeves' performance as being quite stiff, and Neo as a character is a blank slate, but once again, I can't say I agree. I actually think it's refreshing to have a sci-fi action movie where the main character is a more soft-spoken introvert, rather than a quipping badass or a naive farm boy. There are still vestiges of Keanu Reeves' chilled-out surfer dude public persona of the time, which instills Neo with some real charm and fun, despite how understated the performance is. And considering Neo finds himself in such a grim situation, it only makes sense that he acts quite reserved. At the same time, this is what makes the double act of Neo and Morpheus, which dominates the second act, so compelling. Lawrence Fishburne is simply incredible in the role. He truly embodies the cyberpunk equivalent of a warrior monk, deeply wise and humble while also looking cool as hell, rocking a leather jacket and shades, and dropping sick-ass kung fu moves. Which is why it's so devastating to see such a poised and effortlessly cool character beaten and captured by Smith. Thus, when Neo, who has been so passive up until this point, decides to go on the offensive, it's simultaneously nerve-wracking and cathartic for the audience. This is an exceedingly dangerous world where the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against our heroes, yet it's still a world where they can kick all kinds of ass and look cool while they're doing it. I feel like the transition into the film's third act more than anything spearheads the story's central theme of fighting back against control. The world of the machines is so fixated on everything, life forms included, having preordained positions and specific functions. Therefore, the climax of the movie is not just Neo and Trinity fighting to save Morpheus, but a battle to free themselves of control. So great is their drive for freedom they can bend the very laws of physics and download any new skills into their brains. This is what makes the final fight between Neo and Smith so gripping. Not only is it amazingly choreographed, performed, captured, and edited, but the thematic implications make this feel huge. Hugo Weaving's Agent Smith is comfortably one of the all-time great movie villains. Once again, he is uncanny in the way he looks, moves, and speaks. His boxy suit and deep fighting stances make any of his opponents look like they're having a fistfight with a literal brick wall. But it's his bizarre speech pattern which gives him such a magnetic screen presence.
In one life, you're Thomas A. Anderson, program writer for a respectable software company. You have a social security number, you pay your taxes, and you help your landlady carry out her garbage.
In some ways, his presence actually resembles Morpheus. They are both figures of immense authority, but while Morpheus derives his authority from uplifting others, Smith brutally puts others down. The finale in which Neo is killed and then resurrected is essentially what everything in the movie builds up to. Not just in terms of story, but in the visual language of the movie and especially in the music. Don Davis' score for The Matrix is basically a masterpiece. Although it features little in the way of memorable themes and recognizable motifs, it thankfully doesn't fall back on the repetitive, dull action cues which dominate so many modern movie scores. Rather, the experimental post-minimalist inspired style results in a score which is constantly shifting and evolving. But the moment Neo sees the code of the Matrix and defeats Smith, the score finally coalesces into something truly triumphant and heroic. Neo's victory in the end isn't merely winning a fight, but taking back control of his own destiny. Not only has he mastered the world of the Matrix, but he's even found a home in the dystopian real world thanks to his love for Trinity. While there is frankly an absurd amount of ground to cover when it comes to discussing the Matrix's themes, ideas, and readings, one of the most obvious is the film's status as a piece of transmedia. A number of unrealized concepts in the movie, such as the character's switch, literally switching genders between the real world and the Matrix, are well documented. I've also seen an interesting proposal that the love story between Neo and Trinity is not the traditional hero gets the girl arc, but rather a metaphor for someone embracing a female identity. Mirror images are a common motif throughout the movie, and there is a visual similarity between Neo and Trinity, akin to the resemblance between Murphy and Lewis in RoboCop, which also has a fascinating trans reading. There is a lot more to this, but I don't want to risk talking over some voices who can explore this particular topic in much more detail than I ever could. I'll link to some great essays and articles in the description, but here on YouTube, I'd also like to recommend these videos by Jesse Gender, Aronok, and Sophie from Mars. The Matrix is now 24 years old, and while some commentators call it a product of its time, saying it has aged poorly, I think the opposite is true. The masterful storytelling, exhilarating action, and spectacular imagery are just as breathtaking as they've always been, but when it comes to its themes, concepts, and ideas, there are still new discoveries being made over 2 decades later. And that is precisely why it will remain a classic for decades to come.
No one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
Upon release, The Matrix was met with critical and commercial success. Moviegoers and critics alike praised the film's imagination, visual effects, action, and themes. The collectively mind-blowing experience felt by many who saw it captured the zeitgeist in a way that was seen to eclipse the release of Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace, which came out the same year. The movie went on to gross $467 million against a $63 million budget. Its considerable impact as a genuine pop culture phenomenon meant The Matrix also did gangbusters on home video and other tie-in media. Speaking of which, I'd highly recommend any movie buffs grab the recent 4K Blu-ray release if you haven't already. It looks gorgeous. Like discussing the movie itself, it's difficult to know where to start when discussing the pop culture impact of The Matrix. It helped revolutionize visual effects with no shortage of bullet time imitators and parodies. In the wake of The Matrix, Yuen Woo-ping was soon hired for projects like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Kill Bill. It's arguable The Matrix paved the way for martial arts becoming a staple of action movies today. The Matrix also showed that originality and complexity don't always deter wider audiences, but in fact can attract them. Christopher Nolan's Inception is a clear spiritual successor to this film. In the years since, there have been those who have derided the film's lack of originality. Famously, comic book writer Grant Morrison voiced their belief that The Matrix ripped off their graphic novel series The Invisibles, and some clickbait internet articles have lumped this in with comparisons to Dark City. However, I personally think these comparisons are completely overblown. I'm a big fan of Morrison's work and Dark City, and while there are some commonalities, it's disingenuous to call The Matrix a straight-up rip-off of either work. Ultimately, while The Matrix was more the result of underground cultural trends rather than something wholly original, I think The Matrix succeeded where some of the others failed because it absolutely slaps. The Wachowskis simply had their fingers on the pulse, so to speak. At the time, few could see how such a project would ever be successful, but in retrospect, it's incredibly obvious why it was. And with that immense success came immense pressure when the Wachowskis attempted to follow up The Matrix with a sequel. Following the smash hit of The Matrix, there was plenty of appetite for a sequel, and thankfully the Wachowskis already had ideas for not just 2 sequels, but numerous spin-off media as well. In 1999, during a trip to Japan with producer Joel Silver, the Wachowskis mapped out the full scope of their ambition to expand the Matrix story in multiple mediums: live-action film, Japanese anime, and video games. Despite the sheer number of projects proposed, overall everything was treated as a single story. The two Matrix sequels, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, were to be written and produced as a single film. While Enter the Matrix would serve as a sidequel, the short anime Final Flight of the Osiris would serve as a prequel, and the other shorts would fill in the backstory of the various characters and the universe as a whole. The scope of the production was enormous, rivaling the monumental undertaking of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. However, unlike that film series, rather than releasing the various Matrix works yearly, Warner Bros. Wanted to make 2003 the year of the Matrix, releasing The Matrix Reloaded and Enter the Matrix in May, The Animatrix in June, and finally The Matrix Revolutions in November of that year. Further video games The Matrix Online and Path of Neo were later released in 2005. Most of the major cast members returned for the sequels, including Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Hugo Weaving. Marcus Chong was asked to reprise his role as Tank, however contract negotiations soon broke down. The reasons for this are complicated and really worth its own video or article, of which several have already been made. If you're curious, feel free to seek that material out, but I won't deign to air all that dirty laundry here. Suffice to say, the character Tank was written out of the sequels, apparently dying off screen. His spot on the Nebuchadnezzar crew was filled by Link, played by Harold Perrineau. In addition to Perrineau, the supporting cast of The Matrix expanded greatly. Jada Pinkett Smith was cast as Niobe, Harry Lennox joined the cast as Captain Locke, Clayton Watson as The Kid, Anthony Zerbe as Councilman Hammond, Anthony Wong as Ghost, Ian Bliss as Bane, and Nathaniel Lees as Captain Mifune, named after legendary Japanese film star Toshiro Mifune. Inside The Matrix, Randall Duke Kim was cast as the Keymaker. Swiss martial artist Daniel Bernhardt was cast as one of the new agents, Agent Johnson. Playing the villainous Merovingian was French actor Lambert Wilson, while Italian actress Monica Bellucci played the Merovingian's wife, Persephone. The ghostly twins were played by Australian twin actors Neil and Adrian Raymond. Playing the Oracle's new bodyguard Seraph was Hong Kong action movie star Colin Chow. Reprising her role as the Oracle was Gloria Foster. However, Foster tragically passed away after completing her scenes for The Matrix Reloaded. The character was later played by Mary Alice for The Matrix Revolutions. Another tragedy also saw the untimely death of singer and actress Ilea, who was originally cast as Link's wife Z. Z was then recast with Nona Gay, and the character's scenes had to be reshot. Sean Connery was originally approached to play the Architect. However, after reading the script, he didn't fully understand the plot or the character, and so declined the offer. German-Australian actor Helmut Bakatis was cast instead. Before filming, the production once again enlisted the help of master Yuen Wo-ping to coordinate the stunts, choreograph the fights, and train the actors. Building on top of what they had learned for the first Matrix, the cast were able to tackle far more complex sequences.
On good days of training, we get the steam.
December, January, February, March, April, May, June.
8 months of training.
Months. It's harder this time.
They have improved a lot. They have the foundations of the last time's training. So based on that, the result coming out is really ideal.
Shit is hard.
Filming began in March 2001 at Fox Studios Australia. In contrast to the first film, very little of Reloaded was shot on location. Instead, enormous sets were constructed for exterior locations due to the complexity of many sequences, which necessitated the filmmakers having strict control over the environment. This included the park where the famous Burly Brawl sequence took place. The brawl took 27 days to shoot, with Reeves and his stunt double Chad Stahelski facing off against extras and stuntmen who were either Hugo Weaving lookalikes or wearing rubber masks.
Every afternoon for 9 weeks, me and 12 stuntmen on the floor went through a 5.5 minute routine. I believe I had over 500 moves. You know, we were doing 18-second takes with 180-degree steady cam where I have over maybe 20 moves, 25 moves.
They figured ultimately it was easier for me to just learn each move on the day. I actually got to know the first 10 or 15 Smith's moves, but ultimately on the day they changed anyway. So I really was learning the fight as they would in Hong Kong, which was just on the day.
All the Agent Smith doubles were pretty much auditioned. We auditioned about 50 guys, acrobats, gymnasts, martial art guys, regular stunt guys. Put them through about 4 months of training to mimic the actor Hugo Weaving, as well as learn the fight choreography and develop the skills they're going to need for this.
There were Smith lessons where I'd watch them run and then I'd watch them walk, and then so I kind of gave them a few pointers, but it wasn't more than a couple of lessons really. Well, I realized how far my hair's receded. Normally I look at myself in the mirror and I think, yeah, that's all right. But here I'm looking at everyone from the side and I go, look how far it's gone.
When VFX costs were factored in, the Burly Brawl alone cost an estimated $40 million, making it one of the most expensive single action sequences ever made. The same applies to the freeway chase scene in the film. At first, the production went in search of a stretch of real motorway which could be used for filming. The city Akron in Ohio, USA, offered the use of their Route 59 highway. However, this proved to be inadequate. Instead, the production built a 1.5-mile-long freeway set at a naval base in California.
You walk around the corner and there's just this 1.5 miles of freeway. And the very end of it, it's backdropped by the most amazing vista of San Francisco. Sat at the end of it.
It's probably one of the biggest movie sets that's ever been built.
The set it's 1.5 miles long. It was amazing the amount of material in it. It was like a big void. A bunch of railroad cars. A great deal of concrete. 3 lanes of traffic. Flattage that's over 3 miles long. I couldn't actually tell you how many pieces of timber go into it. It's just a lot of times 20.
I forget that I'm on a set a lot of times.
Route traffic anyway, we feel like everyone's got enough space to try like full-on stunts with practice space, to spare.
And Carrie Ann, to her credit, can drive her ass off. She would do the 180s and the 90s, and within 2 hours, she was whipping the car around like she'd been doing it all her life.
One of my favorite things that I did in the film, and I got in one take, which was very exciting for me, was my sliding 90 into camera. I think they call it a juicy lift. It's all about brake and handbrake and sliding and hitting your mark and starting the turn at the right point.
The sequence also required Carrie Ann Moss to learn how to ride a motorcycle.
Start off with a tiny little bike, master my tiny little bike, get on a little bigger bike. If it wasn't for RA, I would never have been able to get on the motorcycle and do that. Him and my stunt double, Deb.
Any last words?
Pray for us.
General Motors donated over 300 vehicles to the production, almost all of which were destroyed.
We've got 5 cameras on the back, and you've got operators on all the cameras, and I had this sign that was above me, which was the bail out point, where if you went past that sign, you were committed and you couldn't stop. Had all these cars barreling down behind the camera vehicle. I'm looking at all these cars, and then I go, roll cameras, roll, roll, roll. 2 of the cameras didn't roll, and I look up at the sign, and the sign's 5 feet, in front of me. So I go, abort, abort, and all these cars, we all come to a screaming halt, and we stop, and I remember all these doors coming open, and all these stunt guys getting out and looking at me going, are you absolutely insane? What did you call abort for, And I said, well, the cameras weren't working.
For the visual effects of the film, Warner Bros. Created their own visual effects studio, ESC Entertainment, a team which included John Gaeta from the first Matrix. While bullet time had wowed audiences in the first film, the use of physical stills cameras meant each sequence was extremely time-consuming and costly to plan and execute, which made the same approach for the bullet time sequences in Reloaded far too cumbersome. Therefore, the ESC team sought to make the camera entirely virtual, which meant not only creating entire environments, but also costumes and the actors themselves. To this end, they developed a new technique they called universal capture.
So we built a system that we use multiple high-def cameras, use them to shoot an actor, and then we can reconstruct that actor's facial performance. Every little muscle movement, every mouth movement, eye movement, teeth movement, all of that can be reconstructed so that we can then fly around that with a virtual camera. So we can then stick that onto a live person's body or onto a synthetic body.
The problem with working on actual humans is they're so recognizable. You look at humans every day, you're very unforgiving when you see CG hair or CG face or any of those things.
It would take an animator who was basically the Picasso of his time to actually completely freehand a performance like that.
Don Davis also returned to compose the music for Reloaded, reprising many of the motifs he created for the first film. For a number of action cues such as the Burly Brawl and Freeway Chase, Davis collaborated closely with the multinational music group Juno Reactor. Davis's orchestral style was mixed with Juno Reactor's techno and club beats for a more high-octane, fast-paced sound. After a grueling shoot and incredibly complex post-production, the highly anticipated Matrix Reloaded was released on the 15th of May 2003. Unlike the first Matrix, which has received near universal acclaim, its sequels are much more controversial. While I do agree that Matrix Reloaded isn't as good as its predecessor, I think the dismissive attitude some fans have to the film and the derision it often receives in online circles is quite unfair. Regardless of its flaws, The Matrix Reloaded is an incredible filmmaking achievement, which should be commended for its ambition and imagination. In a sense, Reloaded does what any good sequel should, expanding on the story, characters, and world of the first movie, and taking those elements in interesting, unexpected new directions. The movie hits the familiar beats of the first Matrix, but it isn't long before we're presented with new and exciting additions to these familiar elements. Seeing more of the real world, the city of Zion, the free people who reside in it, provides us with greater context for the larger conflict as a whole. And if we thought we'd seen everything the Matrix had to offer already, Reloaded bombards us with striking new visuals, locations, characters, and ideas. True to Morpheus' words to Neo, we're truly seeing how deep the rabbit hole goes. But while this is an impressive looking and sounding movie, it's also true that it's quite flabby in places. The first Matrix is tight and efficient. A truckload of detailed world building and complex exposition is dumped on the audience, but it never feels dull or boring. The exposition is delivered so creatively and paced so well that on the rare occasion it does slow down to ponder philosophy, it feels like a well-earned breather. Reloaded, however, doesn't strike the same balance. There are numerous scenes where the plot seems to pause so characters can discuss the film's various themes at great length. While the content of these discussions is genuinely fascinating and the dialogue is delivered well, it does result in the movie feeling very stop and start at times. The movie kicks off with Neo battling agents, and then we have a long talk with Councilman Hammond about the nature of coexistence. We get an awesome fight between Neo and Seraph, and then a long talk with the Oracle about free will. There is a veritable lecture from the Merovingian about something similar, and then Neo throwing down with his henchmen. This sometimes has the effect of robbing the main characters of their agency as they sit or stand in place being talked at. To reiterate, the content of this dialogue is very interesting and the overall story direction is exciting, but I don't begrudge anyone for getting a little bored in these scenes. That isn't to say there isn't plenty of captivating action and drama within the film, far from it. Reloaded has some of the most incredible action set pieces in cinematic history. The Burly Brawl is utterly jaw-dropping in its choreography. The speed and efficiency with which Keanu Reeves moves in this scene is simply breathtaking, and the direction, music, cinematography, and editing is virtually flawless. What lets this sequence down, however, are the fully CG shots. Comparisons are often made to video game cutscenes, and I do see why. Make no mistake, these effects were truly state-of-the-art at the time, and the amount of innovation needed to pull them off is very impressive. But in the end, I think the visual effects team simply hit a ceiling in terms of what the technology was capable of at the time. While this was a huge leap forward, none of it looks especially convincing, and each time the scene cuts between live action and full CGI, it's pretty jarring. Those same issues aren't present in the freeway chase though, which is mind-blowing. The sheer scale of this sequence beggars belief. What would be the climax in any other action movie happens within a single vehicle of Reloaded's freeway chase. Not only are there amazing car stunts enhanced by spectacular visual effects, but we also get a bike chase, fight scene, and stunning last-minute rescue. And these are just the highlights in terms of action. The Agent fight, Sarah fight, and Chateau fight are all brilliant pieces of martial arts action filmmaking and performance. Though a lot of it may not be very emotionally involving, it's hard not to be at least impressed. But for all the film's strengths, the true culmination of its weaknesses has to be the architect scene. The revelation that the prophecy of the One is merely another system of control by the machines, and Zion's destruction has already happened multiple times, is massive. Not to mention incredibly ballsy as a creative direction to take the story in. And Neo having to choose between the woman he loves and saving humanity offers exactly the kind of high emotional stakes much of the movie is missing up until this point. Which is why it's such a shame this huge twist is delivered in yet another long exposition dump, where a main character just kind of stands there. I genuinely don't blame anyone for not even knowing what the hell happened in this scene. What should have been the moment the rug is pulled out from underneath the audience's feet with a mind-blowing twist, instead understandably leaves a lot of people either bored or confused. That being said, once the weight of the architect's revelation properly sinks in, the following scene is the culmination of all the movie's strengths. Although I heaped praise on Neo's various fights throughout the movie, it's Trinity's fight against the Agent near the end of Reloaded which is easily the most gripping. Just like Morpheus's clash with the Agent earlier in the film, this confrontation is filled with danger, as Trinity doesn't have the luxury of Neo's powers to fall back on. Unlike the elaborately staged set pieces surrounding Neo, this fight is gritty and visceral. The tension mounts as Trinity draws ever closer to her prophesied death, with Neo accelerating beyond supersonic speeds in his desperate attempt to save her life. And in a fitting bit of dramatic symmetry, just as Trinity was able to resurrect Neo, he too resurrects her. While some may cry Deus Ex Machina, for me the emotion of the scene really works. In a radical reassertion of his own agency and a rejection of the destiny given to him by the machines, Neo refusing to let Trinity die is a truly powerful moment. Ultimately, The Matrix Reloaded is kind of a mess, but in my estimation, it's a beautiful mess. I commend the movie in its ambition, and as a sequel, it builds on the foundations of the first Matrix in exciting and surprising ways. It certainly has its fair share of problems, and I can understand why a lot of people were left disappointed. In spite of its flaws, however, The Matrix Reloaded has really grown on me over the years. While it doesn't manage to live up to the first Matrix as a sequel, it's still very much a worthy sequel. Hype for The Matrix Reloaded was high, and this was hype which translated into box office success. By the end of its theatrical run, the film earned over $741 million worldwide, supplanting Terminator 2 as the highest-grossing R-rated movie ever at the time. Despite its commercial success, however, it was not as universally acclaimed as its predecessor. While critics and audiences praised the action set pieces and general presentation of the film, criticisms were levied at its plot and pacing. The wider pop culture perception of the film soon turned sour, with many deriding it as overly complicated and boring.
Although the transport process has altered your consciousness, you irrevocably remain human. Ergo, concordantly, vis-a-vis. You know what? I have no idea what the hell I'm saying.
This was a sentiment which potentially posed a danger to the success of the so-called Year of the Matrix. Even though the lingering questions surrounding The Matrix Reloaded would be somewhat answered by the end of 2003, the larger legacy of the Matrix trilogy would prove to be a little more complicated. As understandably divisive as the Matrix sequels are, a sentiment I keep seeing crop up in comments since I started this retrospective series, which I simply can't agree with, is outright dismissal. The notion that everything following the first movie should simply be forgotten has always struck me as deeply reductive and unfairly disdainful. This form of engaging with the larger Matrix mythos not only fails to commend the genuinely incredible work done by hundreds of talented artists which went into the two sequels, but also offhandedly ignores exciting and experimental additions to that mythos, such as the Animatrix. As the Wachowskis were mapping out their ideas for the Matrix sequels, an idea which interested them and producer Joel Silver was expanding the mythos in multiple mediums. Not only would there be more live-action feature films, but also video games and animation. The influence of Japanese anime on the Matrix was always obvious, thus it seemed fitting to return the favour to that art form by reaching out to some of the most notable figures in the industry to create an anthology of animated shorts. With screenplays or stories written by the Wachowskis themselves, they met with 7 directors who could bring these shorts to life. Mahiro Maeda was relatively new to directing when he was approached to work on The Second Renaissance. For most of his career, he was a designer working on Neon Genesis Evangelion, among other things. His notable work as a director at that point was on Blue Submarine No. 6, a series which experimented with blending hand-drawn animation with CGI. Shinichiro Watanabe, on the other hand, was already a household name for anime fans in the East and the West due to his work on the critically acclaimed Cowboy Bebop. Unlike other directors in the medium, Watanabe often varied his style dramatically from project to project, and the same goes for his Animatrix shorts Kid Story and Detective Story. Compared with Maeda and Watanabe, Yoshiaki Kawajiri was a much more experienced director, having gotten his start in the mid-80s on Lensman: Secret of the Lens, an adaptation of the highly influential space opera book series by E.E. Smith. Other notable works of his include Wicked City and Ninja Scroll, which was one of the primary inspirations behind the concept of bullet time in The Matrix. He would write and direct the short Program, as well as write the screenplay for World Record. Takeshi Koike was something of a protege of Kawajiri's, directing World Record, which Kawajiri wrote. He would later direct the epic 7 years in the making sci-fi racing film Redline. Koji Morimoto, director of the short Beyond, had previously worked alongside the legendary Katsuhiro Otomo on Akira and the anthology series Memories. The animation talent didn't just come from Japan, however, as the Wachowskis also hired Korean-American animator Peter Chung, creator of the cult cyberpunk series Aeon Flux. The short Final Flight of the Osiris would be handled by the US division of Square Enix, or simply Square at the time, directed by visual effects artist Andy Jones. The actual animation of the shorts was mostly handled by each director's own respective teams, in Japan, Korea, and the US. For Final Flight of the Osiris, Square mostly used the same techniques they had used to create the film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within a few years earlier. Motion capture with real actors combined with hand animation and visual effects for what was at the time a photoreal look. Other shorts also used CG animation but integrated it into the hand-drawn style. Most of the machines in the Second Renaissance were computer-generated, and all of them were immatriculated. Post-production was largely handled by the Matrix movie team. Don Davis composed the music for all of the shorts, once again collaborating with Juno Reactor on several tracks. The sound design, sound mixing, and voice acting was also handled by the live-action team, with Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Clayton Watson reprising their respective roles. The completed anthology was later released in select cinemas and on home video in June 2003.
In the beginning, there was man. Then man made the machine in his own likeness. Thus did man become the architect of his own demise.
The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions may be divisive, but I honestly think the Animatrix is straight up underrated. A showcase of some of the best and brightest in animation working at the absolute top of their game. Whether the viewer is compelled by the stories or not, the sheer depth of creativity and passion on display has to be admired. It should go without saying that purely on a technical level, this anthology is outstanding. Having Don Davis compose the music for all of the shorts and bringing in the sound design from the movies was definitely a smart move. Each story retains the feeling and atmosphere which makes them unmistakably part of the Matrix, but the individual styles of each director makes each short feel totally unique as well. I have a real soft spot for animation of the late 90s and early 2000s when CG animation was just coming into its own. I'm really fond of movies like Treasure Planet, Titan AE, and Atlantis Lost Empire for their blending of hand-drawn and digital animation. It's a style which exists almost entirely because of the technology of a bygone era, and yet it also feels somehow timeless. Some may disagree, but I was also very surprised at how well Final Flight of the Osiris held up on a recent rewatch. I know for some people this early 2000s photoreal CG animation gave off a lot of Uncanny Valley vibes, but I can't say it was ever an issue for me personally. Then again, I do actually like Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, so maybe I'm just a weirdo. As well as enjoying the different styles of animation, it's also really enjoyable to see the Matrix universe viewed through so many different lenses on a purely design level. Entries like the Second Renaissance and Final Flight of the Osiris fit snugly into the established aesthetic of the movies. But then there's entries like World Record and Detective Story, which reinvent this aesthetic from the ground up. I love the hybrid of neo-noir and diesel punk in Detective Story, a digital world which feels strangely analog. It's been suggested that these shorts take place in previous versions of the Matrix, but then again Trinity is in one of them, so that doesn't really make much sense. Rather than attempting to explain these design differences in concrete terms, I'd rather just enjoy the artistry on display. In terms of storytelling quality, however, the Animatrix is less consistent, though I'd hesitate to call any of these outright failures. The Second Renaissance is actually one of my favourites, though even I can't deny how pretentious it is at times. Evoking historical imagery like the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Vietnam War, and the Holocaust rings a little hollow. It's visual shorthand to lend the events more thematic weight than they actually have. Part 2 is still not subtle about its imagery, but it's more successful at connecting that imagery to the themes of the story. For the most part though, Part 2 is striking in its depiction of the war between humanity and the machines. This is like heavy metal cover art come to life, propelled by the absolute headbanger of Rob Overseer's Super Moves music track. Not only does the sequence paint a vivid picture of the scope of the conflict and the devastation it wreaks on the Earth, but also its visceral horror in the small details. The way the machines gradually move away from their humanoid forms to more alien, insectoid, or cephalopod forms as they gain control of the planet is also a great touch. As far as I'm concerned, the rule of cool always applies to any work of sci-fi, and the Second Renaissance is cool as hell, though that doesn't make it any less effective at communicating the magnitude of what was lost as humanity fell to the machines. Considering all the Second Renaissance really had to do was fill out some backstory, it does so in a provocative and awe-inspiring way. Other shorts in the anthology have a more personal approach to the Matrix universe. Entries like Detective Story, World Record, and Beyond work so well precisely because the viewer is ahead of the characters, at least they're assumed to be, which is what makes these stories all the more tragic. Private Detective Ash was on the cusp of discovering the truth, even winning Trinity's quiet respect before he's forced to give up his life. Athlete Dan Davis even wakes up from the Matrix for a brief moment before being yanked back under the control of the machines. And Yoko caught a small glimpse of the boundaries of her world before it was wiped from her mind forever. Each time these characters see only a piece of a much larger puzzle, which they'll never be able to solve. Only the viewer can make sense of what has happened to them, but the characters never will. Matriculated is probably the most out there in terms of concept and execution. The idea of turning individual machines to the human side via a virtual reality of human construction processed by a machine mind is utterly fascinating. There's no hand-holding whatsoever when it comes to understanding exactly what's going on here, and the short is all the better for it. These are literally machine dreams, and there's a great deal of fun to be had dissecting the meaning behind the imagery on screen. However, it would also be fair to say that while most of these shorts are visually and thematically engaging, they aren't on the whole very emotionally engaging. That is with the exception of Kid Story and Program. In a very short space of time, we come to really care for these characters and what they're going through. Program in particular might be the best of the bunch, with its simply gorgeous art style and compelling central conflict going on inside the main character Sis. The facial animation and vocal performance does a great job of conveying the fact that Sis is actually tempted to take Duo's offer to return to the Matrix and betray her crew. It makes the finale just as emotionally impactful as it is visually stunning. I also think Final Flight of the Osiris sets up a solid relationship between Captain Thaddeus and Dewey. To reiterate, I can understand some folk getting put off by Uncanny Valley vibes with this one, but it doesn't bother me personally. The flirty sword duel at the beginning does a great job conveying the sexual and emotional chemistry between these two. While the rest of the Osiris crew are disposable, this relationship, however briefly seen, provides us with a solid emotional through line for the action. In the end, the Animatrix is a pretty terrific addition to the larger Matrix mythos. Excellent animation, thought-provoking concepts, and one-off characters with memorable designs and compelling journeys. While the 9 shorts may amount to a novelty for fans of the movies, what they represent as works of art is very exciting indeed. In terms of a legacy, the Animatrix doesn't really have one. It sold well on home video and was reviewed well by critics, but its pop culture footprint pales in comparison to the live-action movies. Even Path of Neo can be said to have a stronger following these days. Although it remains little more than a curiosity to most Matrix fans, its spiritual legacy is much larger. What I mean by that is, while not too many people remember the Animatrix, the goals of the Animatrix and the philosophy behind its creation has been replicated since, either consciously or coincidentally. Recently, both Star Trek and Star Wars added some animated anthologies to their mythos, and shows like Love, Death and Robots found genuine mainstream success. The influence of the Animatrix may not be directly responsible for these newer animated anthologies, but it was an early experiment which most certainly succeeded. The second and third Matrix films were shot back to back, coinciding with the development of the video game Enter the Matrix and the animated anthology The Animatrix. All major cast members from the first and second Matrix movies returned for Revolutions. This was with the exception of Gloria Foster as the Oracle, who sadly passed away after completing her scenes for Reloaded. Mary Alice took over the role for Revolutions, a change which is acknowledged though not explained in detail in Enter the Matrix.
Do I know you?
You know me, though you may not recognize me.
Are you telling me that you are the Oracle?
I know this won't be easy for any of you. Change never is.
If you are the Oracle, tell me if I believe you are.
You don't right now, but you will.
Can I ask what happened?
The Merovingian warned me that if I made a certain choice, it would cost me. He is, among other things, a man of his word.
New cast members included New Zealand actor Bruce Spence as the Train Man. Spence was best known as the gyrocopter pilot in Mad Max 2 Road Warrior, and would later appear in Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith as the alien character Tion Medon. He also appeared as the Mouth of Sauron in The Lord of the Rings The Return of the King, in a scene which was cut from the theatrical release and restored for the extended edition. Making up the family utilising the Train Man's services was Bernard White as Ramachandra, Tarini Mudalia as Kamala, and Tanvir K. Atwal as Sati. To voice the machine character Deus Ex Machina, veteran voice actor Kevin Michael Richardson, who also voiced Captain Thaddeus in Final Flight of the Osiris, was hired. A new addition to the Zion characters was Chara, played by Australian actress Rachel Blackman. A huge part of the production of The Matrix Revolutions was the Battle of Zion. This massive set piece necessitated enormous sets, intricate practical effects, large-scale miniatures, and more boundary-pushing digital effects. The gate miniature was roughly 20 feet tall and 50 feet wide. The model of the hammer, which itself was over 15 feet long, was then crashed through the gate by sending the entire ship down a rail at high speed. The crane tower model was approximately 15 feet high. When the crane is hit by a swarm of sentinels, explosives and wire pulls were used to rip the crane off its tower. For the sentinels themselves, new software had to be written to simulate the masses of sentinels in their various swarm shapes. Among the swarms, the animators created individual sentinels for key shots, which were hand animated. Further CG effects were also used to extend the Zion dock and blend the miniature photography into the CG environments. While the armoured personnel units were mostly computer generated, the cockpits where the actors would sit were all practical. The cockpits were mounted on a motion base similar to those used for flight simulators, which was then driven by the animation of the CG mech. The same kind of motion base was also used for the Hammer's cockpit. A huge mechanical arm was used for the stunt performers playing characters who got snatched up by the Sentinels. The rig was nicknamed the PMS arm, or Please Make It Stop arm, for the nausea it induced in many performers. This arm was also used extensively for the climactic Neo-Smith fight to simulate the flying movement of the characters. To research the flying sequences in advance, the visual effects and stunt teams actually took several parabolic flights so they could see what fighting would look like in a real weightless environment before attempting to replicate it in a studio. However, the ground-based piece at the start of the fight proved to be its own unique challenge due to the heavy rain. Keanu Reeves had some difficulty moving fast enough because as the scenes went on and his costume took on more water, the heavier it became. Meanwhile, Hugo Weaving had difficulty speaking as bubbles kept forming in his mouth. Inside the building, Keanu Reeves' stunt double Chad Stahelski performed the elaborate wire work, while Reeves himself did all the fighting. While Stahelski also handled many of the flying scenes, motion capture was also used for the digital doubles of both actors. The universal capture system from Reloaded was employed for the facial animations. This universal capture was also used for the other Smiths on the street. Hugo Weaving performed all of the facial expressions for the various doubles, which was then digitally mapped onto the other actors. On set, these actors wore Hugo Weaving prosthetic masks and were also joined by a large number of dummies. The Machine City was largely inspired by coral reefs and insect hives. To this end, Deus Ex Machina was made to resemble a kind of sea star with its many tiny machines swarming like insects. The baby face the swarm makes was added for a disturbing effect, modelled after the Wachowskis' own nephew, with performance capture driven by Kevin Michael Richardson. Once again, Don Davis scored the film, in collaboration with Juno Reactor. Davis took many of the established leitmotifs of previous movies and expanded them into grander themes, in particular Neo and Trinity's love theme, as well as the motifs used for Zion in Reloaded. For the climactic Neo-Smith fight, the track Neo Damarung made use of a large choir singing in Sanskrit, inspired largely by Indian mantras. These mantras were then reprised for the credits track Navras, which was co-composed by Juno Reactor. After a 270-day shoot and nearly a full year of post-production, the final installment in the Matrix trilogy was released on the 5th of November 2003. While The Matrix Reloaded was heavily flawed but still commendable overall and exceptional in certain instances, I straight up love The Matrix Revolutions, which I know is not a very popular opinion. Unlike Reloaded, which could be criticized for being slow and plodding at times, Revolutions is almost all action from start to finish. But like Reloaded, Revolutions is commendable for shaking up the Matrix formula and giving the audience as much new stuff as possible. I've often seen people bemoan Revolutions because so little of it takes place inside the Matrix. The gravity-defying martial arts and spectacular gunfights aren't as prominent in this third entry, but for me that's why Revolutions works so well. Between Reloaded's burly brawl and freeway chase, the films essentially hit a ceiling with that kind of thing, so Revolutions makes the smart choice by moving the majority of the action into the real world. This gives the events of the movie an added sense of viscerality and danger. Neo's fight with Bane is a brutal and bloody slugging match where any mistake could be fatal, a fight which even costs Neo his eyes. There isn't the safety of the Matrix to fall back on this time. This is something which also extends to the Battle of Zion, which dominates the movie's second act. Again, I love this sequence. In terms of visual storytelling quality, spectacle, and drama, it's on par with Helm's Deep as far as I'm concerned. The visual effects hold up beautifully with a near seamless combination of live-action photography, miniature work, and CGI. But once again, it's in the granular details where the sequence shines. Rather than lasers and death rays, the Zion defenders fight mostly with heavy-duty ballistic weaponry and industrial-looking mech suits. This gives the action a real sense of weight and realism, while the Sentinels are an overwhelmingly terrifying enemy. The fact the Sentinels don't kill with any sci-fi weaponry but instead slice and rip people apart gives the entire battle a horrific quality. As the battle turns against Zion, the entire dock transforms into a pure hellscape. bathed in a fiery glow, filled with great plumes of black smoke, and swarming with hordes of sentinels, the screams of the few remaining soldiers being picked off and torn apart echoing in the background. It's an absolutely incredible set piece. A criticism I can see being applied to the sequence, however, is the strange absence of most of the main characters. For almost the entire battle, Neo and Trinity are completely absent, and Morpheus and Link are elsewhere on the hammer, though this race through the tunnels while fending off Sentinel attackers is an exhilarating sequence in its own right. This is a criticism I do understand, but in many ways the focus on minor supporting characters for much of the battle actually works. Because Mifune, Kid, Locke and Z are not major characters, it means they're all the more vulnerable. There's no plot armor to stop them being killed off, and it's not as though the viewer doesn't root for them. Captain Mifune and Captain Locke command the screen effortlessly through the sheer gravitas of their respective actors. The Kid works perfectly as the boots-on-the-ground everyman, doing his bit to help as best he can within this nightmare. And Z and Chara win us over simply by getting so close to taking down the Machine Army's drills. Whether intentional or not, the fact that it's ordinary people doing the frontline fighting, not badass warrior monks or cyberspace messiahs, makes the battle simultaneously more frightening but also inspiring. This is not a fight anyone can bullet time their way out of. Instead, it's through faith that victory in the face of such odds is even possible that wins them a reprieve. When the movie does return to following its cyberspace messiah, that sense of danger and vulnerability isn't lost. The journey to reach the Machine City is a difficult one, and one which comes at a heavy price.
Oh no.
Killing off Trinity in this moment comes as a real shock. This is the person who has been with Neo from the very beginning, the person who willed him back to life and he in turn resurrecting her. Though they aren't the most charismatic characters, the lengths they both go to for one another speaks of a profound connection between them. They serve as each other's rock. And so when Trinity dies in the Machine City, it's not only immediately devastating, but also leaves Neo untethered and truly alone as he soldiers on without her. Following all of this grittiness and horror, the return to the Matrix is appropriately surreal and spectacular. This whole end fight is a masterclass of epic filmmaking. The pouring rain resembling the Matrix Code and flashes of lightning gives us a real sense of the Matrix coming apart at the seams. Keanu Reeves and Hugo Weaving are on top form with the fight choreography, the water coming off them making every hit feel extra powerful, but it's the music which makes the sequence truly breathtaking. Don Davis' score for Revolutions is actually my favourite score of the trilogy. The way the long-running motifs have evolved into distinct themes lends so much of the Revolution score an added dramatic weight without ever losing that signature Matrix flavour. Neo Damarung is comfortably the soundtrack's crowning achievement. Coupled with the breathtaking visuals and story context, we really feel this is the all-or-nothing moment of the story. Despite the awesome nature of the final battle, however, there are some who are disappointed by the ultimate conclusion, which seemingly sees Neo defeat Smith just because. And having a character literally called Deus Ex Machina certainly doesn't help this perception. While, once again, I find this criticism understandable, I don't agree. What I think throws people is that the mechanics of this conclusion rely on setups which only exist in the previous movie. This is why I usually rewatch the sequels in a single marathon, because in a sense Reloaded and Revolutions are both parts of the same movie. Really, it all comes down to Neo and Smith's relationship to the Source. Smith was meant to go to the Source after his death in the first film for deletion, but as he explained in Reloaded, he refused. Therefore, when Smith assimilates Neo, who is connected to the Source in the real world, it allows the machines to finally delete Smith. It all makes sense based on the established internal mechanics. Trouble is, those mechanics were introduced in a film viewers watched months before Revolutions, and conveyed in long exposition dumps which a lot of viewers lost interest in. So I can understand why some people see Smith's defeat as coming out of nowhere. The same issue is present with the narrative themes. Much of the setup for the conclusion of Neo's arc is woven into Reloaded, but he mostly stands still in Revolutions until the third act. But if you want a detailed breakdown, I'd highly recommend this video by Just Right. Essentially what Neo's triumph over Smith embodies is the ultimate expression of free will. Neo is the person who chooses to help others at any cost, even his own life. And finally knowing that's who he is means that the reign of the machines and Smith coming to an end was always inevitable. This is what makes the end of the war so uplifting, because despite the iron grip the machines had over humanity, despite how outmatched the resistance was at every turn, it's the power of their belief that allows them to finally be free. Looking at it now, I don't think the trilogy could have had a better ending.
Did you always know?
Oh, no. No, I didn't. But I believed. I believed.
Upon release, The Matrix Revolutions was met with largely negative reviews, and though it was a success at the box office, it was the lowest grossing of the trilogy. Looking back, I think it was a mistake to release both sequels in the same year alongside The Animatrix and Enter the Matrix, as it risked oversaturation, and placed Revolutions in direct competition with The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. While Reloaded met with a mixed reception, Revolutions was seen by many critics and moviegoers as a disappointment. The reception seemingly solidified the Matrix sequel's perception in pop culture as failed follow-ups to a great original film. Nevertheless, The Matrix continued to sell well on home media, sequels included, and the cultural phenomenon kicked off by the first movie allowed the mythos to retain its lofty pop culture status. In 2021, The Matrix returned to the big screen in the form of The Matrix Resurrections. Unfortunately, the movie was a box office bomb and met with a polarized reception. Just like the sequels, I don't think it's right to simply dismiss the movie out of hand, despite its failings. Really, the biggest problem with The Matrix Resurrections is that it shouldn't really exist. The trilogy wrapped things up nicely, and the Wachowskis had no intention of ever making a fourth movie. Thus, when Lana Wachowski eventually decided to take up the reins, the resulting movie was a far more meta-textual and personal affair than I think anyone was really expecting. I do appreciate that The Matrix Resurrections clearly comes from a very sincere place, and I know the film resonated profoundly with many trans viewers. I also think its metatextual elements were a bold inclusion, and the substance of these elements is certainly interesting. In spite of that sincerity, however, I don't think the same passion was there when it came to the actual filmmaking. The stylish direction the Wachowskis usually bring to their projects is largely absent from Resurrections. There are some shockingly poor visual effects, and the action sequences aren't shot or choreographed to the same standard as the original trilogy. The glossy look of the film also results in both The Matrix and the real world feeling very artificial. Most of the action inside The Matrix feels as if it's confined to one or two streets, and the new human city, Io, seemingly only has about a dozen people living in it. That being said, I think the attempts at evolving the lore are largely successful. Free machines existing alongside humans and the isomorphs are pretty cool concepts. The cast is also generally strong, with Jessica Henwick and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II in particular stealing many scenes. Though I do think it was a strange choice to recast Morpheus and bring back Agent Smith without Hugo Weaving. Overall, while the substance of The Matrix Resurrections is compelling, the movie itself is a bit of a letdown. But then again, the idea of doing a fourth Matrix movie was flawed from the start. I'd much rather have Resurrections as it is as opposed to a cash grab relying on shallow fanservice, which this so easily could have been. I think there was a time when liking the Matrix sequels was seen as some kind of hot take, but in recent years I feel this has changed. The first Matrix is still easily the best one in my estimation. Where The Matrix is a tightly woven piece of philosophically oriented sci-fi action, Reloaded and Revolutions are definitely flabbier and do stumble in many places. But to reiterate this point once again, to dismiss the Matrix sequels outright is unfair and reductive. There is plenty worth talking about with these movies, whether one likes them or not. The immense undertaking behind these films is something which should be celebrated. The filmmaking craft on display should be revered, and original blockbusters driven by passion should always be craved. The Matrix trilogy is a rarity. A project like it being made today is unlikely, but then again the likelihood of it being made at the time it came out was also low. The Matrix, Reloaded, and Revolutions make up the kind of movie experience which only comes along once in a generation. Overlooking it would not only do a disservice to all the passionate individuals who worked on it, but also do a disservice to those who believe in the power of films like The Matrix. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video and want to see more, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on future uploads. On my Patreon, you can see videos early and ad-free. The link is in the description. Thank you to all of my patrons and members, with an ultra thanks to LaBelle Games, Tim Spot, Eamon Kelly, Michael Hardy, County Arc, Mike Halsey, Olivia Computer, Bano, Jaron Walker, Tom, Director Kate, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Lilac Yane, Ed Mark Starr, Extreme Streamers, Howard Craig Kervik, and AS Caging 101. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, have a good one.